Welcome to the Buick Outdoors Podcast. I'm your host, Sheldon Marion, and on this podcast, we dive deep into the outdoors. We discuss hunting and fishing techniques, give you tips and tricks, tell stories, and everything in between to help you enjoy the outdoors. This podcast is brought to you by Northbound Gear. Northbound Gear is designed for maneuverability and durability and is made to last through even the toughest of elements. My go-to for their pants is the water resistance adventure pants and their lined waterproof jeans. I've worn them while out ice fishing, crawling through the woods bear hunting, and on the west coast out on the boat. And I even wear them around when I'm having a lazy day at the house. They are that comfortable. They also offer jackets, summer pants, backpacks, and many more. Men's and women's sizes are available, and by partnering with One Tree Planted, you're planting a tree with every purchase. Check them out for yourself at northboundgear.co, and when you use my promo code Sheldon15 at checkout, you'll receive 15% off your order. That's northboundgear.co and promo code Sheldon15. Hey everyone, welcome back to another Buick Outdoors podcast. If you're new here, my name is Sheldon Marion, and if you're watching us on YouTube and you want to listen to it on the go, you can find us on all major podcast platforms. Just search up the Buick Outdoors Podcast and you'll find us pretty well everywhere. Also, if you're just listening to this and you want to watch the podcast, if you head over to our YouTube channel, you'll see a podcast playlist and it has all of our podcasts on there. And we also have a bunch of other videos on there, hunting, fishing, exploring, outdoor adventures. So go ahead and check that out. But anyways, guys, we're going to get right into it here. Today I'm going to be talking about cooking over a fire and kind of just cooking in general. I'm going to go over the basic fundamentals pretty well. Lighting a fire, keeping it going, controlling the heat, seasoning, and then just a real short cooking aspect of it. Basically, for me, the tried and true fire starter method is just the basic lighter and matches. From there, you got all sorts of different things you can use. Newspaper, birch bark, you got lighter fluid, kerosene. There's stuff that comes in like aerosol cans, which is, I'm pretty sure what that is, just like kerosene and aerosol. You got cotton balls that are soaked in Vaseline. I make those just at home. Take a Ziploc bag, put a couple tablespoons of Vaseline in there, grab a handful of cotton balls, throw it in, squish her all up till everything's kind of coated. And then when you go to use those, it's really easy. You can either use a lighter, match, or what I like to use is just like the flint and steel. And you just pull a cotton ball out, get a little bit of fluff on top, hit it with a spark, and away she goes. And then with your fires, you always want to start small and work your way up big. So around here, what we have a lot of is just kind of like your dead spruce branches with like the old man's beard or witch's hair on there. You can also start with dry grasses and birch bark, get those going, and then move up to your small dead twigs. And then from your small little twigs to branches, and eventually you work your way up to small rounds or split firewood. And basically, that's her for lighting a fire. Get her going real small and just slowly work your way up. If you smother it too soon, you'll just pretty well put the fire out, and then you just gotta start over. But whatever, it's good practice. But when it comes to cooking over a fire, once you get your fire going, you want to have a couple of pretty good sized pieces on there, and then just kind of let her die down into coals, because then big pieces of wood, they'll give you some really good coals with a lot of heat in them, depending on which firewood that you use. A lot of the firewood around here, we mainly tend to stick to poplar, pine, and then spruce. If you're cooking with poplar, it doesn't give off much for heat. So cooking over the coals on poplar, honestly, it doesn't really work that good. You'll have to have a continuous flame when it comes to poplar. When it comes to pine and spruce, they work the best. The only problem with that is if there's a little bit of flame. You have to be kind of cautious on which ones that you use. If there's a lot of sap in the tree, you'll end up getting like quite a bit of an acidic taste to it. But as long as you kind of pick and choose and you find the stuff that's really dry, you shouldn't have too much problem with that. Once you get your fire going, you have a couple nice big blocks in there. Let her die down into coals, and then that way you can have like a controllable fire. And then also, once it's down to coals, if you do have to turn up the heat a little bit, make sure you have a few small pieces of firewood right close by. And when I'm talking small, I'm talking like kindling pieces of wood. It doesn't take much to raise your temperature up. And basically keep a poking stick right close by too. That way you can kind of move the burnt wood around, the coals around, or if you want to reposition some of your firewood, if you're cooking more than one thing at once, you kind of want the heat on your main thing, like your meat, and you want a little bit of a cooler fire on your vegetables, so that way you don't burn it. Then what I like to do is you have kind of like your cooking coals right underneath your grill or whatever it is that you're using there. And then just slightly off to the side, I'll keep almost like a separate fire going. And then that way, as your cooking coals start to cool off and die down, you can grab coals from your secondary fire and just kind of top it up, kind of a thing. So in that way, if you don't want to keep, like the small little like controllable firewood right beside you, kind of a thing, you can just grab more coals and add it as you go. Also, if you're using what I use, like an A-frame setup, you can just raise and lower it, kind of a thing, to control your heat as well. Unfortunately, those are they're a little bit hard to come by, and they are pretty expensive. If you're using like an oven grate kind of a thing, you can buy those for a couple bucks or whatever, or just find one for free. And those ones, you generally just set them on some rocks or a couple of logs, and there's no adjustments. So you have to control your fire or your coals. And with that being said, controlling the heat is pretty well number one. When you're cooking over a fire, you have to remember that, it's basically like a poor man's barbecue. If you need more heat, turn up a little bit, add coals or add a tiny little bit amount of wood to it, whether it's a small little piece of kindling or a handful of branches, kind of a thing. You'll raise the heat, a lot with just a little bit. Also, if it does get too hot, if you have your poking stick right handy, you can push this stuff to the side, you can spread it all out. It is actually very easy to control the heat once you kind of mess around a little bit and really just test it out. One thing I do is I just hold my hand over the fire. You can spread it out, put your hand back up there, and you can feel the difference in the heat, right away. It doesn't take long at all whatsoever. And one more method that you can use is like caveman style kind of a thing, where you don't have a cooking surface whatsoever. You don't have an A-frame, you don't have a grill top or anything like that, and you basically just cook directly on the coals. I know some people enjoy that. I've tried it a couple of times, and it's not too bad, but it's not as controllable as all the other ways of doing it. And when you're putting it directly on the coals, again, depending on what kind of wood that you're using, you could just completely burn the outside of it, and the inside would be like blue rare kind of a thing if you're cooking a steak. But if you're using a much softer wood, say like poplar, you actually might be able to get away with it slightly. The only problem with poplar is when you're burning poplar, it does give off a lot of ash. So it's probably not the best one to use. If you're going to do the caveman style, I would honestly just suggest buying a bag of like hardwood charcoal briquettes from, whatever store. And basically, once you get your fire going, dump out a handful of those charcoal briquettes and just cooking on that. That stuff, it's made with very specific wood. That's actual hardwood. And for us in the north, we're typically not going to find those types of wood. We have a lot of softwood up here. We do have some hardwood, being alder and birch mainly. But this problem with that is, in order to cook with those, you basically have to cut those down, split them, and then season them. But if you just buy a bag of charcoal, it's ready to go right out of the bag. And then when it comes to the actual seasoning of your food, depending on what you're cooking, a little bit will go a long ways. But also, like, when you're cooking, if it smells good, it's most likely gonna taste good. The only thing that you can't taste is salt, and for the most part, spicy. So like, when it comes to adding salt and pepper, just make it light. When it's all said and done, you can always add more salt. You can always add more pepper when it's done. But while you're cooking, it's pretty hard to take that stuff back. If you're making like a soup or something, you can add more broth or water, but then it's all watered down and stuff, and it's just not going to be as enjoyable if you have too much salt. So when it comes to salt, use it very sparingly. Like I said, you can always add more at the end. When it comes to seasonings, you can make your own. I've made my own mixtures several times, and for the most part, they always they turn out pretty good. But this day and age, there's so many different seasonings that you can buy that are already pre-made. Like Mrs. Dash, Clubhouse, La Grill. They're all amazing stuff. Recently, there on our last camping trip there, I brought out it was Mrs. Dash garlic and herb, and I used that on everything. It was awesome. It was great stuff. Clubhouse makes a ton of really good ones too. One that I use quite a bit is the roasted garlic and red pepper, I think is what it's called. And then also guys like La Grill, they make Montreal steak spice, chicken and rib, vegetable medley, or something like that. They're all just, for the most part, they're all really good. And when it comes to that stuff too, just because it says chicken and rib doesn't mean you can't put it on broccoli or try it on corn, kind of thing. You can mix it up a little bit, especially with something like whatever, chicken and rib. It might taste great on sweet corn. You never know until you kind of mix it up, and that's one of the nice things with cooking, that you can experiment a lot. One thing too, you don't have to commit 100% to it. You can always grab a spoonful of your cooked corn, grab your spices off the counter, give it a little dash, and taste it, and see if it doesn't taste good. Well, then don't mix that whole thing up, right? You can always try new things and stuff. And I've used Montreal steak spice on vegetables before, and it was okay. I probably won't do it again, kind of a thing, just because of some of the strong flavors that are in it. But some things like the vegetable medley, that's great on a ton of stuff, especially chicken. There's a wide variety of use with that stuff. Lemon and herb spice, I use that a ton on fish. I also use it on like sweet potatoes. There's something to do with the kind of the lemony tang with the sweetness of a sweet potato. It just mixes up extremely well. So when it comes to cooking, mix things up a little bit, try different things, and yeah, don't be afraid to go out and buy these pre-made seasonings. It's not exactly cheating by any means. You're still the one doing all the cooking and stuff. But yeah, and they taste great, and they're fairly cheap for what you get. Now, when you're starting off seasoning pretty well anything, you want to start off light. Don't you're not making a dry rub for the most part. If you're seasoning up a steak, give it a little sprinkle. At the when you're done cooking and stuff, if it doesn't have enough, you can always grab it off the shelf and just throw on some more, kind of a thing. You also have to take into consideration on how thick your meat is that you're cooking. If you're doing just a little thin slice of minute steak, it doesn't need to be drenched. A tiny little bit will do the trick. But when you're using the same seasoning on like a 1 inch steak, you're only seasoning that real top layer kind of a thing, but you have a lot more meat to deal with too. So the amount of spice that you need for a real thin minute steak is going to be a lot less than a great big huge thick steak. Also, if you are making up like your own seasoning mixtures, you have to be very cautious when it comes to the salt. If you're using garlic powder, make sure you're using garlic powder, not garlic salt. Same thing with onion powder. If you want to use onion powder, it tastes great. It works awesome in a lot of stuff. But make sure it's onion powder, not onion salt. Because if you're using those two and you're adding salt and pepper, you'll oversalt it almost every single time. And I've had a few meals cooked for me where they used garlic salt and onion salt and regular salt, and man, you can't eat it. It's just way too salty, and it's a good way to screw up a lot of good food, kind of a thing. So just be mindful when you are doing your seasonings with that. So for me, one of the best ways to kind of cut your teeth on this when it comes to cooking outside is something that it kind of sounds big and scary, but it's actually really, really simple to make. And that's just steak, potatoes, and corn over the fire. And I say that mainly because it's easy to make, and I just did it just a couple of days ago. Me, Shelby, and Blaine went out on a camping trip, just out in the bush under the stars kind of a thing. And the meal I made for them, man, you couldn't have had a better meal out there. And to cook that up, it is so simple, but the outcome of it is just amazing. And basically, you get your fire going. This trip I used the little cotton ball trick. Got the fire going, put on all my spruce branches, let that build up, put on all my big branches, and then a little bit of split firewood that we cut up. And once we have a nice big bed of coals happening, I spread it all out nice so we have a spot for our potatoes to go. So you take your potatoes, you slice her down the middle, you open her up, and you take salt and pepper. Again, a little bit goes a long ways. If you don't have enough when you're done, add more, kind of a thing. But put a little bit of salt, a little bit of pepper on there, some of that Mrs. Dash garlic and herb spice, and then cut off pretty well 3 little slivers of butter, put it into the middle of your potato, sandwich it together, roll up in tin foil, and then off to the side of your main fire, I had a little bed of coals just sitting there. You take your potatoes and set them directly on there, and basically I let them sit there for about half an hour. And what I do is I just turn them about every 10 minutes or so. You can roll them if you like, but when you roll them, a lot of times, the seams and stuff on tin foil, it's not all that good. And all your butter and flavor and seasoning and stuff, it just kind of runs out the top. And then it kind of burns on the outside, and that slowly trickles its way in. And then you pretty well have a burnt flavored potato. So that's why I don't roll it. I just turn them, kind of a thing. Then after the potatoes were cooking for about 30 minutes, I basically pull out my steaks. And one thing that you want to do is you want to make sure that you have thawed steaks. If the center is still frozen, what ends up happening as you're cooking the outside, you're thawing the inside, and then the inside never has a chance to actually cook. Basically, it just melts the ice crystals, keeps everything cold, and it keeps it kind of wet, but not in a good way, kind of a thing. You end up getting like a lot of water inside instead of like the juicy meat moisture, kind of a thing, if that makes any sense to you. But anyways, pull out your thawed out steaks, season both sides. Again, I use that Mrs. Dash just because it was there, nice and handy, and it was so I can only had to bring out one little thing of seasoning. And then you top it with salt and pepper on both sides. So once you have your steaks all seasoned up, what I do, for me, is I was using my A-frame so I can cheat a little bit. I can raise and lower the cooking rate. If not, basically you just control the fire, adding more, pulling more off, or whatever. But basically, if you can take your hand and put it above your cooking rate, and if you can hold it there for about 5 seconds before you have to pull your hand away, then it's the perfect temperature. And that's for cooking over a fire or cooking at home on a barbecue as well. Over the fire, it's really nice, or on like a charcoal barbecue, because by the time you cook one side and you flip it, by the time that other side is all seared and charred up real nice, the fire's naturally starting to die down already. And then what you're able to do is you can just put the lid on it and finish it, kind of a thing. But in this case, we're cooking outside, so we don't really have that option. But it will give you a great little searing on both sides. And then once it starts to die down, like as you're cooking, I'm constantly putting my hand above the grate just to make sure I'm keeping that temperature. And again, if you can't hold your hand there for 5 seconds, it's too hot, use your poking stick, push some coals to the side or whatever. Or if you can sit there and hold your hand there all day, it's way too cold. So you just add a little bit of wood onto your fire, and like I said, a little bit will go a long ways. A handful, not even a handful, 3 or 4 little sticks or twigs will generally do the job. So before you put your steaks on the grill, what I want to do is I take my corn and I get that all ready. I pull all the husk off and then take out everything on the inside, get it all cleaned up nice. And then basically when it comes to cooking corn over the fire, I don't really do anything to it whatsoever. I just place it directly on the grill. And typically I put it on at the same time I put the steaks on. And then that way, when you put your steaks on, you get a nice sear. And then with the corn, when you put it on, it starts to brown the corn too. And when you're browning the corn, there's a fancy term called the Mallard reaction. And basically what that means is the heat reacts with the amino acids and the natural sugars that are within your meat and your vegetables. And what that ends up doing is it caramelizes all of the natural sugars and the fats that are in it. And then that way you get that caramelization, that real nice thin brown layer, and it makes it look better, smell better, and taste absolutely amazing. So when you're cooking over the fire, or when you're cooking over on a barbecue, you really want that browned meat, that charred look and smell to it. It's not some fancy chef thing. Like, there is an actual reason why you want to brown your meat, and in this case, why you want to brown your corn as well. The only thing when it comes to cooking stuff like vegetables at the same time with steaks on something like a cooking platform is you really have to be cautious on how your fire is. A lot of times I'll kind of build up a big layer of coals, so where the top of the coals is where I'll be cooking the steaks, and then right where there's kind of a dip, it's slightly colder, so that's where I'll grill the vegetables, kind of a deal. And then that way you're not burning your corn and undercooking your steak. It is controllable. And again, that's just using your poking stick, moving coals around, adding wood where you need it, pulling wood off or coals off where you don't need it. And then that way, again, it's just all about controlling the temperature of your fire and controlling the temperature of your coals. And when it comes time to flip your steaks and turn your corn, basically, so your potatoes, every 10 minutes or so, I'm turning it about 180 degrees, especially with that fire still going in front. There is a little bit of radiant heat that's hitting the edge of your potatoes. So if you just leave it in one spot, all the coals, the heat from the coals underneath are cooking it evenly. But with that radiant heat coming from your fire, you're going to have one side that could be potentially burnt, and the other side, it'll be cooked, but it's not going to be evenly cooked. So that's why every 10 minutes or so, you want to grab the potatoes and rotate them. With the corn, basically you just go by looking at it. Grab it and just rotate it slightly every so often, every couple of minutes kind of a thing. And that way you get kind of a browning all the way around. And if you miss a couple of spots, it's no big deal. Like, it is nice to have that caramelization on the corn, but it is a little tricky to get it just right. So if you don't get that on corn, like, just don't sweat it. For the steaks, though, it's really hard to say for time-wise, just because I'm not there controlling the heat. But a good thing to kind of keep into consideration is just grab the corner, pick it up, and look underneath. If it's nice and browned and you have that little bit of fat starting to kind of bubble up and drip out and stuff, give her a flip. And it really, if you flip it a little too early, whatever. Cook the other side for a little bit longer and then flip it again. You're not looking for grill marks. You're not, it's not going to win some beauty pageant kind of a thing. You're cooking food over a fire, and you're going to cook it the way that you like it. If you stay that steady, 5 seconds over your cooking grate before you pull your hand away, is generally speaking about 3 to 4 minutes per side kind of a thing. And once your one side is nice and charred and caramelized and looks good, flip it over, and then the other side, again, let it cook and caramelize and brown up. And once you start to see that little trickle of blood starting to come up through the cooked side, you basically have a medium rare steak. So if you're starting to see that little bit of red starting to come through and you don't like medium rare, flip her one more time, go for another 2 minutes, flip it again, another 2 minutes, and then that way it cooks nice and even, and you'll probably end up coming out with a medium steak. So again, it doesn't take much to kind of figure this stuff out, and it is, for the most part, fairly simple, especially once you learn little tips and tricks, like when the blood starts to rise up through the top, you got a medium rare steak for the most part. Depends on how you're controlling your fire too. When you first start it, and if it was nice and hot, you put your steaks on there, you got a nice sear. By the time you flip it, and your fire has died down, and now instead of being able to hold your hand there for 5 seconds, you can hold it there for 10 seconds. The fire is definitely colder, like much colder than the first time. So you're going to have to stoke it up or finish it like that and just kind of have like a slow roast. If you want to do a slow roast, one thing you can do is once as you brown both sides, take tin foil and cover up the top. That way the heat will go up. It'll hit that tin foil and reflect back down, and it creates a small dome of heat there. So you kind of have an oven effect, but it's not, it's not 100%, but it does keep some heat from dissipating out. Now, once as you figure that your steaks and your corn and your potatoes are all done and all that stuff, what you want to do is you want to take your steaks off first. And when you take your steaks off, take just a small little sliver of butter and put it on the top of your steak and just let it melt. Let the steak rest. And again, people tell you to, like the head chefs and stuff, they'll tell you to let your steak rest. And it's not just because they're chefs and it's something that you say on a script. When you're cooking, all of the water molecules inside the meat, they're all going, a mile a minute. They're going nuts. Once as you let your meat rest, the meat relaxes, the water molecules slow down, and it starts to settle out within the meat. Then that way, when you cut your steak open, for the most part, the juices will stay actually inside the meat. Where if you take a steak off the grill, cut it open right away, all of that comes flashing out and it just floods your plate. It looks kind of cool, whatever, but then when you're eating the steak, it ends up almost being like a dry steak. So if you take that piece of butter, throw it on top, let it melt, get your potato off, get your corn off, put on whatever it is that you have for your potatoes. For us, it was grated cheese, some sour cream, and bacon that I cooked up over the fire as well. And then once that is all said and done, everybody's plated up, everybody's sitting down, you're ready to go. Your meat's been resting for roughly 5 minutes. Then when you cut into it, there's going to be a lot more moisture actually in the steak itself. Oh, look how juicy that is. Perfect. Oh. For the corn, when you're cooking it this way, you honestly don't need butter. You could put a little bit of salt on it just for a little extra flavor. But when you're cooking it over fire like this and you have that really nice caramelization and browning on it, it makes it much sweeter. And, butter almost kind of ruins it. If you boil corn, I honestly think you need butter for sure, because when you boil corn, you're pretty well tincturing all the sweetness and all the nutrients out of the corn when you boil it, and it doesn't taste good. I do not like corn on the cob that's boiled, because to me you have a byproduct of a tincture basically, and it's no good to me. I don't really enjoy it. But when you're cooking it over the fire, for the most part, all the moisture and juices stay inside that corn. You get that nice browning, the sweetness from the browning from that, and you can just bite into her and down the hatch she goes. And you honestly don't really need butter, but if you want to put it on there, by all means, you're the one eating it, not me, kind of a thing, So, yeah, and then if you bring any other spices with you, like a vegetable medley type thing, don't be afraid to sprinkle a little bit of that on there and give her a go. But for the most part, I think everybody's eating corn on the cob, a little bit of butter, salt, and pepper, and man, it's good, especially cooked over the fire. With your potatoes, when you're cooking over the fire, it is fairly hard to bring everything that you want. A lot of people, they want sour cream, bacon bits, chives, and yada yada, and you can bring it with you, but it starts to complicate things a little bit. But for us, we brought a little thing of grated cheese and sour cream, and basically I just opened up the potato, took the grated cheese, threw it in there, put sour cream on top, and then I just left it alone until it was about halfway done eating my steak, and then I tied into the potato, and by then the heat of the potato melted all the cheese, and man, it was good. Yeah, it tastes it tastes amazing when you do that. For a little bonus thing for you, if you want a little bit more flavor out of your cooking when you're cooking over the fire or using a charcoal grill, you can add like just your natural hardwoods that are around. For us, it's the alder and birch. When you're doing that, it has to be green and the bark has to be peeled off. If it's not green, well, it's just firewood. It's just gonna burn up. It's not gonna smoke at all. And also, if you leave the bark on, the bark is what holds all your natural oils. So if your bark is on there, the bark will burn, but the actual tree itself, it won't. But it'll give off like a black smoke. And then that black smoke comes into contact with your food. And then when you bite into your food, you're going to taste that black smoke. And it's a very acidic flavor. And it's not that good. It's not going to make your food very enjoyable. But as long as you cut off, well, depending on your size of your fire. But for us, it's, you have like a 12-inch cooking space kind of a thing. So you just cut your alder or your birch in 12-inch lengths. Peel the bark off, and one little stick of alder will mainly do the trick. And you just put that into your coals, and it'll slowly start to smolder, and that smoke will rise up, and it's just like using apple wood chips or maple chips. It's a real hardwood, and it gives off an amazing little flavor, and it's just a nice little touch if you kind of want to try something slightly new. If you want to see how I made up this meal, we did just get back from our camping trip, and I filmed it all. So if you go over to our YouTube channel, you'll see it on, I believe it's Outdoor Adventures playlist, and it'll be the first one on the top of the list there. When this podcast comes out, if you listen to this on a later date, it might be a little bit further down the list. But yeah, you'll see the little thumbnail of us just laying on the ground, the A-frame, and the meals in the actual thumbnail there as well. You'll see a couple of big steaks and some corn on a little cooking platform there, and yeah, it was a great meal that we cooked up in the woods there. But anyways, guys, I hope this short little podcast here helps you out. If you have any questions about cooking over a fire or on a barbecue or just cooking in general kind of thing, I am by no means a chef whatsoever, but I have been able to throw together a couple of pretty good meals in my day here. So yeah, if you guys have any questions or comments, just leave me a comment down below, and I'll make sure to respond to all of them. Also, if you enjoyed this podcast, give us a like, give us a review and a rating, leave us a comment, subscribe to our YouTube channel, and yeah, guys, catch you on the next one. Dude, I don't think that's gonna work. All they're gonna hear is you purring. Come on, buddy. No, I'll pet you later. I know, friend. I know. We can try. Okay? If you promise to be good, you can stay here with me, okay?